Despite the fact that I'm currently in a shed, go ahead and drop it. That title easily could have busted this entire building open, but thankfully it didn't, and we're here with the power panel. I am Iadarola, and very lucky to be joined on the show today by Rebel HQ contributor Jackson White. Jackson, always good to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
Always good to be here with you.
And the deep diver himself, Jordan Ewell. Thank you as well.
Thanks for having me, John.
Now, I'm sure everybody watching this already knows, but yesterday you and Cenk and Adi and Brooke and Brett, you did something special. And you took the one chip challenge. It's been a few hours now. How are you feeling?
I'm okay. Adi had a rough night. If people watched last night, Adi decided to go a full 30 minutes before drinking milk, eating yogurt, ice cream, anything to alleviate the pain. She was hardcore. I, threw in the towel much earlier, but everyone, the texts we've been getting, Cenk has been texting us updates throughout the day about his body, and
Cenk is still incapacitated.
Yeah,
that's why he's not here. Everyone, it's really sad.
Cenk's really going through it.
I'm surprised that Jordan's tongue is intact. Adiana originally had like mascara and then streaks of blood streaking from her eyes. It's different, but that is what you guys will do to raise money, and you did indeed raise a lot of money, right?
Right. Yeah, we went into that stream. We had already raised This community has raised over $20,000 for the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation. And last night, you all raised another several thousand more. We're on the precipice of hitting $29,000.
That is awesome, and Jordan was telling me earlier that if we hit 30 live during the show, he's gonna have another chip. And then
I did not say
talking.
That. I did not.
Yeah, but now it's out there. So do you really want to retreat from it? I don't know if you do. Anyway, glad to have you both on. Thank you to everybody who donated to that effort. Obviously a very good cause. And we are going to launch into an awesome show. We've got an hour that we're gonna be giving you, and then in not that much longer, Jared Jackson is gonna be leading the second hour, joined by Maz Jobrani and Ben Carollo as well. So definitely join them. Through the course of this hour, we're gonna be talking about a lot, including news from Ukraine, news having to do with fossil fuels. And I'm hoping we can get to the story at the end of the hour that has to do with cops breaking down a door, and how they go about it in certain neighborhoods and how they go about it in others. Very interesting little story there. So stay tuned for that. But I think it's about time we launch into this. So why don't we start off with this video? What you're seeing is the aftermath of an apparent Russian missile strike on a train station. And it's a train station that was specifically being used to move civilians, families, women, children, from the incredibly dangerous eastern portion of Ukraine to the relatively safer western areas of Ukraine. And it was struck by a missile. Initial reports say that at least 50 people were killed, although we expect that those numbers will rise as time goes by. Another 98 at least injured. That's at the Kramatorsk train station in eastern Ukraine. They say it was a Russian missile strike. They say it was very clearly marked that would be a place that civilians were added, been used for quite some time to move people out of the region, and yet this happened. Now, the Washington Post was on the scene within about 15 minutes, and they began the counting of the dead. I mentioned that really only to try to jump out in front of some of the false flag allegations. I know it's wasted effort, because nothing like this can be accepted at even very rigorously reported face value. There's always an assumption that if it reflects poorly on someone, it's gotta be a false flag. But I wanna give you a little bit more information, including you can see on a map where the city is located. It is quite close to Donetsk and Luhansk in the eastern portion of Ukraine. And as a result of the massive loss of civilian life, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia, quote, cynically destroying the civilian population, adding, this is an evil that has no limits. But before both of you jump in, bear in mind, the Russian Defense Ministry has denied any involvement in the strike. They said that Kyiv was responsible. Although we should bear in mind that they initially announced that they had carried out a successful strike until reports emerged that civilians had been killed, in which case they then said, oh, oops, that wasn't us. That was the Ukrainians themselves. Jordan, I'm gonna start with you. What do you think about this?
It's not surprising. This is an absolutely reprehensible government and militaristic operation. It's nothing short of disgusting. My heart goes out to the victims, and it's tough as an American to say, oh yeah, these are explicitly war crimes when the United States doesn't even participate in a global system or even recognize the International Criminal Court. So we have like a toothless response as Americans, and it's hard not to feel powerless in this. So I think the best thing the United States could do is recognize legitimacy in the authority of the ICC, and I think that would strengthen a global response to these types of actions. And within that is reining in our own actions, joining the international treaty banning cluster munitions. This is something the United States has recently denounced when Russia did it, but we aren't signatories to that treaty either. So it's tough as an American to criticize what Russia is doing while it's objectively reprehensible when we do it ourselves. So I'm kind of struggling to kind of reconcile both of those things.
Jackson?
Yeah, so I think it's important to look and see that really what Putin's done is he's put Russia in such a position that they're gonna have to get bailed out big time. Russia's economy sunk so bad, their people are cornered in such a position to where Putin, as time drags on, and that's really the whole point of the sanctions, is for the public to turn against him. But him coming out and making statements like, nukes aren't off the table when he has more nuclear weapons than anyone else on earth, and him saying things like, the poorest countries on earth are gonna suffer because of the sanctions, as if he's a victim, when in reality, Russia's completely failed at framing this and messaging this to where they look like anything other than the aggressors, anything other than they're just trying to reestablish the Soviet Union as much as they can. But until Putin's gone, Russia's gonna be in a tough spot because the world doesn't want him there. And the longer that he keeps this up, as long as he's there, it's gonna be hard for them to really progress because they're gonna need a lot of help.
Yeah, and look, we know that he's probably gonna end up being perfectly fine because he's got enough money to set up multiple new countries if he wanted to. But we will have more info on new sanctions coming up in a bit. Totally agree with you, the prior point, Jordan, as well, in terms, like it reminds me of when we said initially that we had taken out terrorists in Afghanistan during our withdrawal, and then it turned out, no, we'd killed like 11 or 12 civilians with an airstrike. It was just people getting out of a car at a house in a neighborhood. Yep. It's very similar to this, smaller scale, but not that much smaller. And look, to add, I guess, insult to massive, grievous, horrific injury, a missile fragment that was found near the train station was apparently inscribed with the words "for the children" written in Russian. And a Russian military analyst who monitors the Federation's troop movements had warned via telegram the day before the attack that evacuees should avoid rail routes. And you can see a picture right here. It's the sort of thing, as I talked about in the damage report this morning, when I see a headline like that there many kids had been killed, and then you find a missile with the words on it, my immediate thought is, well, come on, that can't possibly be true. I mean, that's going way too far. This gotta be Ukrainian propaganda, but nobody's come forward with any evidence that that's the case. And to your earlier point, Jordan, it is reminiscent of us writing things on bombs in our prior wars here at the US, or the stories from the Iraq invasion with people getting like biblical inscriptions on their firearms and things like that. It's anything goes, and there's no bottom.
Yeah, this really just reflects just the worst aspects of humanity. This is truly depraved, and the frame. I saw a linguist try to break down how that was used, and it was they said that "for the children" was presented in a way where it was like, oh, we're trying to help the children rather than this is targeting children, and it's just like it is completely detached from the realities of war. Like nothing, like no war is going to make children in that area and their lives better. It's just how war is. It's destructive, it's horrific, it's traumatizing, and this type of attempt to paper over this rot in society and human behavior is just a really, really depraved, cynical attempt.
Yeah, Jackson, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, just everything Jordan said. This really just reveals the most negative aspects of human nature. And even though Putin had just about everything anybody could ever want, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I think that's unfortunately will drag on for a while longer, and it'll probably get worse before it gets better. So,
well, why don't we transition out of some efforts to put pressure on them to pull out of this illegal, barbaric war? There's this ongoing debate in the US government about what sort of aid, when it should be given and all that. And actually, Senator Brian Schatz made news with his condemnation of Josh Hawley's opportunistic side switching in this issue. Let's start off with this video.
This comes from a guy who, before the Russian invasion, suggested that maybe it would be wise for Zelensky to make a few concessions about Ukraine and their willingness to join NATO. This comes from a guy who just about a month ago voted against Ukraine aid. He's saying it's going too slow. He voted no.
So initially, Josh Hawley, like many Republicans and still some in right-wing media, thought, no, we have no part in this. Why would I choose sides? And honestly, if I was gonna choose a side, I would choose Russia, Tucker Carlson said many times. Well, Josh Hawley felt like he was appropriately reading the room and he didn't want any of this aid. Now he looks around the country and he sees that no, the American people aren't interested in the Ukrainians being devastated in this way. They hate what Russia is doing and they want us to help without getting directly involved. And so he's trying to switch sides. At the same time, though, as Schatz alludes to, he's putting a hold on all civilian nominees to the Departments of Defense and State until their heads step down. So he's playing games at the same time. And Brian Schatz has more on that in this.
He voted no on Ukraine aid, and now he has the gall to say it's going too slow. And this final insult is that until what, Secretary Austin resigns? That's not a serious request. And coming from a person who exonerated Donald Trump for extorting Zelensky for withholding lethal aid. They withheld lethal aid unless Zelensky would release false smears against Joe Biden's son. And then he voted to exonerate President Trump for this. And so spare me the new solidarity with the Ukrainians and with the free world, because this man's record is exactly the opposite.
And the thing about Josh Hawley isn't that his record is necessarily that much worse than a lot of these Republicans who think that they're the next wave that's going to replace Trump and everything. I've always felt that Josh Hawley is worse at managing like the public face of it. I think he like a little bit like Ted Cruz can't hide how opportunistic he is, how little there is actually inside of him. He just takes the temperature, he reads the room and uses that to decide whether it's doing the fist up, at the insurrectionist and then pretending like it's bad. And then once a few months go by, he's suddenly a fan of them again. Like he doesn't have that even feigned authenticity that people like Donald Trump or maybe Ron DeSantis do. But Jackson, I'll start with you. What do you think about the role that Hawley's playing in all this?
Well, I have personal issues with, well, not really, but Josh Hawley, he's a senator from my state. He's from Missouri. And in my opinion, from what I've seen, when it comes to politics, he's very young. And so just like you said, he's just jumping on any type of opportunity he can to float onto the conservative culture, whether it be this or whether it be him tackling, those corners of the internet that are really focused on, masculinity and what it means to be a man and a woman in this country from a conservative point of view. And then just his whole America First campaign, and all you got to do is flip the mugs over and it says made in China on the bottom. So, I mean, absolutely, he's not even slick. And he's from Ivy League schools, but in my opinion, he's really not that good at what he does. He's just a young guy in the conservative movement.
Yeah, Jordan.
Yes, Hawley in everything he stands for and talks about is so hollow. Whether it's his populism or now his foreign policy, it's all an absolute charade. I wouldn't be surprised if he did a 180 and ended up endorsing Eric Greitens later in the election. Like that's just, he stands for nothing. But one thing I do want to point out, and this is something that really irks me, is the use of the term lethal aid that we saw from Schatz. Like, he's talking about weapons, to be clear. And I really recoil at this Democratic, rebrand of munitions and weapons transfers to other country as lethal aid. It's ultimately an effort to continue to fund and support the military industrial complex, but in a new, hip, acceptable way. So I really want people to think about this term and how often we've been seeing it lately. Lethal aid is just weapons.
Yeah, personally, I'm offended because I don't think it cloaks what it's doing well enough. I think we should refer to any bullets we send as body ventilators. I think, it's absolutely. What is lethal aid? Is it like we send peanut butter sandwiches to people we suspect might be allergic? Like, what does that mean? Of course, we know.
No, it's
stingers.
It's a sandwich. It's like it's a sandwich, but there's like a big stick of dynamite in the middle. So there's like an aid component.
That might work on Daffy Duck. I don't think it's working on them. What is it? A sandwich? It's one of those chips, the one chip challenge. Anyway, no, it's ridiculous. So thank you for pointing out the ongoing propaganda. But behind all of this, while they're going back and forth and everything, there have been a few things actually passed. So in the last day, the House passed a trade measure to remove normal trade relations with Russia by a vote of 420 to 3. I couldn't take looking at the 3 because I already suspect so strongly that I know who they are, but we're moving on. An energy ban in terms of importing energy from Russia, 413 to 9, and you do know those 9. Biden has already taken executive action to ban Russian oil, liquefied natural gas, and coal to the US and called in Congress in March to do the other part of this, the favored trading status. But that's not all. The Biden administration also earlier this week announced a new round of targeted sanctions, banning future direct US investments in Russia and imposing penalties directly on family members of Vladimir Putin and other top Russian officials. The US also, with other group of 7 industrial nations and the EU, imposed blocking sanctions on Sberbank, Russia's largest financial institution, and Alfa Bank, its largest private bank. And this is on top of already multiple rounds of sanctions that we've instituted before and after the invasion, sanctions that the EU and other powers have also put into effect. So we already knew that a lot of damage was being done. Their stock market was shut down for multiple weeks. Their currency was hit really hard. And now even more is coming. In some cases as a result of, well, at least ostensibly as a result of the massacres in places like Bucha and others. But the most recent attacks will probably only put more fuel on that fire.
Yeah, I think that this goes back to what I said before about as long as Putin stays in, they're just going to sanction everything they possibly can, because now it's become trendy, really. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And it really has in a lot of ways. I mean, like Russian athletes are being barred from participating in different tournaments around the world. So it's like it's become and here he is, while we just saw this footage of him bombing innocent civilians, saying that but these sanctions, they're going to cause people to starve, and it's like there's nothing left to sanction, and he's still there. You know what I mean? So like.
There's studies on the effectiveness of sanctions, specifically in regards to autocrats. And everything the United States did first really didn't touch or affect Putin directly. They should have done this first. And that said, the amount of oil we actually import from Russia is marginal. But this is his money, right? He makes a ton of money in oil. He has a ton of money in oil. This would have directly impacted him immediately, and they should have done that. The one thing I don't really support or care for is all like the corporate moves, like McDonald's trying to pull out and like brands pulling out. It's like he doesn't care. Like Jackson just pointed out, we just talked about, he's bombing civilians. Like he's committing war crimes. He doesn't care if his people can't get a McDouble.
No,
like it's. I don't think this is a guy who isn't empathetic. He's not going to care if his people suffer and have a reduced quality of life. They should have targeted this specifically first, but the complication is US oil prices.
Exactly. Yeah, and they could have. And by the way, as far as I've seen, no corporations have been required to do this. I think that they see it as a relatively low cost way to, I guess, make sure that they don't look bad. Although, like if McDonald's had stayed, do you think people would have been mad at them? Maybe, I can't say for sure. But in terms of the effect, it doesn't help. It puts more pressure on the people, which in a way I definitely don't like. But they, in theory, then could put more pressure on Putin and the regime, which is good, but they've also been doing that for literally years, and it's very difficult to make any headway. But yeah, the idea that he's just gonna like be like, Whataburger, come back. It's probably not actually how that works. And they still got the Coke, so I guess they're doing okay. I do want to follow up on something that you said though, Jackson, because you pointed out some of the more personal level sanctioning that's going on. I've actually been seeing a lot less of those headlines of people like randomly banning like sauerkraut from a restaurant or something. And I wonder, have we moved past that? Are people doing less of that? Like, no, I don't want a Russian cellist in my orchestra. Or is it just that it's not being reported? If that sort of personal level pointless bias is still happening, we're just not seeing it anymore. I cannot tell you how much I hate that. We've been trying to argue against that since the very beginning of this. I don't know if either of you have seen any of those sorts of stories recently.
Not really recently, sprinkled here and there, but just to say like it's been the sanctions and the energy against Russia has been like profound, like worldwide, in ways that few people have ever seen.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
100%. Okay, well, we're gonna take our first break. When we come back, though, Mitch McConnell weighing in on a whole lot of topics. I'm gonna predict you're not gonna like his takes on a lot of this. And then we're gonna jump into a group of fossil fuel CEOs testifying before Congress after this. Welcome to the Power Panel, everyone, with me and with Jordan and with Jackson. It's the 3 J's.
Oh, yes.
That means something.
I like that.
Not sure what, but anyway, I like it too. And that's good because that's the only thing I like out of this block. I certainly don't like hearing from the dusty old crow, Mitch McConnell, but unfortunately, he's in a position of power and perhaps soon even more. So let's jump into it with this.
Fellow Americans beat and bloodied our own police. They stormed the Senate floor. They tried to hunt down the Speaker of the House. They built a gallows and chanted about murdering the Vice President. They did this because they'd been fed wild falsehoods by the most powerful man on earth. Because he was angry, he lost an election. There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it.
No question about it. That is Mitch McConnell criticizing Donald Trump in the wake of the insurrection, saying that he was practically and morally responsible for it. It was a strong stance. Mitch McConnell wasn't taking it anymore for a little while. And then a few weeks went by and he made clear that he would support Donald Trump once again were he to run for president, despite all of that insurrection and coup stuff. And recently, Axios reporter Jonathan Swan sat down with Mitch McConnell and asked him about that flip-flop.
How do you go from saying that to 2 weeks later saying you'd absolutely support Donald Trump if he's the Republican nominee in 2024?
Well, as the Republican leader of the Senate, it should not be a front page headline that I will support the Republican nominee for president.
After you've said that about him, I think it's astonishing.
I think I have an obligation to support the nominee of my party.
What you say matters. You're a very important voice in this country. You're the leader of your party, and you seem to hold two concurrent, conflicted positions, which is
not at all inconsistent. Not at all inconsistent. I stand by everything I said
I understand, but
January 6th and everything I said on February the 13th.
I fully understand that, but take Liz Cheney, for example.
You want to spend some more time on this as well?
I actually do, because I actually, no, I genuinely want to understand this. I really want to understand how you think about this, because Liz Cheney, who has the same view of you of January 6th, she said she doesn't want Donald Trump anywhere near the White House, and she's going to work to not make that happen, because she thinks that there are some things more important than party loyalty.
Yeah. Well, maybe you ought to be talking to Liz Cheney.
No, but I'm not trying to. I really, it's not a gotcha. I'm just actually trying to understand, like, is there any threshold for you of what is someone on a moral level?
I say many things I'm sure people don't understand.
Ugh, that's an understatement. But anyway, look, Axios bothers me in a lot of different ways, but Jonathan Swan is very good at staying on a topic in some of these interviews. And although if you've been watching us for a while, if you've been following politics for a while, you're probably not shocked by what Mitch McConnell said there, what his position is. He is just a hollow shell filled with a desire for ever increasing amounts of power. I think it's important for producing sound bites like that make clear to regular people that there are really no lines. There might be temporary times where he'll come out and say, well, I would have preferred if Trump hadn't cooed, but then they go right back to playing the game. Jackson, what do you think about what you saw?
Yeah, so the first thing that's most important is, first of all, Mitch McConnell's entire point, his entire job is to advance the Republican Party forward, period, the end. He even said it right there. But the most important thing about the Republican Party is that this really is all they can do. After advancing the culture meters so far to the right in this country, especially within their party, they can't just make an about face and change what they're doing. And if they did, if they tried to, the base would lose its mind. I mean, even Trump, when he tries to say like, hey, maybe you should get a vaccine, they boo him. Like, they really actually don't have any control of their base. And this is why they keep doing what they're doing. So this is the bed that they made for themselves. But this also makes the Republican Party extremely dangerous, as we always talk about, because they don't have a democratic future. They just don't. And they're going to continue to, shave away democracy as much as they can, because look at how crazy they are.
Right, that's exactly right. They're going to be cannibalized by their base if they turn on some of these fringe figures, even outside of the Senate or Trump. If they eventually try to turn on Marjorie Taylor Greene, or eventually, God forbid, if Wendy Rogers ever made it to Congress,
oh God,
trying to distance themselves from her, because these people have figured out that there is a critical mass of lunatics in this country who will support them, donate to their campaign. And they got their backs just because they're all collectively brain poisoned from Facebook, from watching Newsmax and OAN and Fox for years. And they believe everything they read. They live in an alternate reality, and there's no, their only political goal is to have power and to humiliate their opponents. It's just really insidious hyperpartisanship. And McConnell, not that anyone ever accused him of having a spine or having integrity, he doesn't care. This just shows he's only motivated by power and control.
Yeah.
No matter who the vehicle is that gets them there, he does not matter. And we'll get into more of that, but it's just they don't care. I wish Democrats could sometimes be as ruthless, because we just see this feckless leadership on the Democratic side. And it's like, oh, they can't do anything. It's very frustrating.
I mean, they can occasionally be ruthless against progressives. They show that ability. So let me sort of dive into a combination of the two things that you're talking about, because Jackson, you were talking about they're basically done. They're done with democracy and all that. And Jordan, you were talking about how he only wants power. So he seems perfectly willing to let a Donald Trump come back in as long as he can continue to pass legislation that he wants. But I would assume that his preference, if he had two buttons, and one was right-wing populist, for whatever that's supposed to be worth, and the other is like machine-produced right-wing establishment tool, I think he'd choose the tool. And so he will support Trump. If Trump is the nominee, he's gonna support him. But is it possible that behind the scenes, to whatever extent he has any ability to influence any of this, he might try to push the party back in the direction of the previous awful incarnation that was full of people like Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney and those sorts of figures?
I don't think they can. I mean, Donald Trump isn't only the most popular political figure in the Republican Party. He's the most popular political figure in the entire United States. Like, and when you really tally his numbers and you really look at how much influence he really has. And the next closest person behind him in polling is Ron DeSantis, and he's dozens of points below. And Trump will not stand for anybody standing him up in any type of way. And so, again, it's like, okay, well, They need someone else with the same type of cultural fire to replace Trump. And until they find that person, Trump can't be replaced. At least that's as far as I see it.
Right. I think Trump he knows how to work the media. He knows how to do and say things that are going to demand attention. And honestly, the corporate media wants him back so bad. Has anyone looked at Chris D'Eliza's analysis pieces lately? Every third one is about Trump coming back or what Trump just said, or here's an 800-word column on Trump's statement about getting a hole-in-one. They want him back so bad because right now for them, politics are boring and they're in a ratings game and they're in a click game. That's how they make their money. It's detrimental to all of us and the rest of the world, but they don't care because they're driven by profit. So if he does throw his hat in the ring, they're gonna eat it up because it's, hey, we get a new bizarre story every single day that's going to drive eyeballs. Absolutely. Yeah. And they don't care.
Yeah. And there's a cost to it, certainly. By the way, it really works out so well for them that I agree with you. Very many of them, I don't know if they, in their heart of hearts, think that they do, but they clearly aren't that bothered by the idea of him coming back. And along the way, which sort of politicians on the other side do they support? People like Joe Biden, those who are not willing to do what is necessary policy-wise to stop Trump from coming back. So it really works out. They support the sorts of Democrats that will give them the sorts of Republicans that they secretly want.
Anyway. That's what's so frustrating about it, because if the Democrats were just a little bit decent, there's no way they would lose to these people because they're nuts. The Republican Party, they don't make sense. They're completely insane. If the Democrat, just eliminate half of student loan debt or do like you said you would and, go 10,000 or do something. That's all you need to do. That's all Joe Biden needs to do, but he won't.
Yeah, just be super callous. do 10,000 then say, and after I get reelected, another 10. Dude, that's right. The most callous thing, and I would hate it. That would be so manipulative. I don't know, that might work actually, but no, we'll see. He delayed it. Is everyone wowed? He delayed the repayment. Oh God, it would be so easy to beat the Republicans if that was the thing that they cared about most. Unfortunately, it's not. Okay, with that said, we are gonna jump to another story, mix it up. Turns out there was a big report that was released this week. Did you know about it? We're gonna dive into it in a sec. Let's start with this.
We can continue down this renewables only path and keep watching our prices skyrocket while also failing to meet demand and also doing next to nothing to reduce emissions.
In Dan Crenshaw's mind, a switch over to renewable energy wouldn't do much, if anything, to stop emissions. Okay, I'm gonna have to look up his academic work in the field. He seems like an expert. But that was what he chose to use his time for, as the House Committee on Energy and Commerce had a hearing where 6 oil and gas executives came on to talk about oil production, inflation, and climate change. Obviously, fossil fuels and our reliance on them have left us in a position where not only are we racing towards a climate apocalypse, but we also, when the price of gas goes up, we're screwed. There's nothing we can do. But that, as much as he talks about having an issue with the price of gas, and as much as many Republicans do, he does not want us to get off of gas. He wants us to be just as vulnerable. And so instead of talking about a smooth transition, he instead just wants to give support to oil and gas. And you'll see a little bit more of that in this.
The fact is that global energy demand will increase by 50% by 2050, and oil and gas is still expected to make up the lion's share of the production. You cannot change these facts. The fact is that renewables will never meet that demand, never. And here's the most important fact. If American natural gas quadrupled in the next decade in exports, which is entirely possible according to industry experts, we would do something amazing. We would displace coal around the world. And wow, just like that, you solve the energy crisis. And by the way, reduced emissions far, far more than the foolish $10 trillion Green New Deal ever could.
And that might be true if natural gas was good for the environment, which it isn't. In some ways, it might be moderately better than coal, but far, 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 far worse than any actual renewable form of energy, because it leads to increased accumulations of methane in the atmosphere. And methane is, depending on which study you look at, 25 times to 89 times worse than carbon dioxide. And so yes, there will be less coal in producing emissions, but there will still be tons of emissions. And the issue fundamentally, guys, is that he will pretend as if, no, you environmentalists, you have been duped. In fact, if you really want to reduce emissions, then what you need is more fossil fuels to be burned. But we know that he doesn't care about that. He's being paid by the guys that he's talking to. His re-election bid is propped up by money from fossil fuel companies. Someday, perhaps a seat on a board or as a lobbyist will be available to him. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, Dan Crenshaw is totally insincere in all of this. There, a couple of years ago, you might remember this. There was a big push by the oil and gas industry, as they have done so many times, to try to cover up what they're actually doing to the environment and act like they're good stewards, right? So the carbon footprint, your individual carbon footprint, this whole myth came from oil and gas to place the blame on you, the consumer, not what they're doing. A couple of years ago, they trotted out this new idea that would help mitigate climate change, and the Republicans, obviously, because they're all in their pockets, championed it. It was carbon capture. We don't need to worry about the Green New Deal. We need to do carbon capture. And Dan Crenshaw was one of the leading proponents of carbon capture. And you can just draw a straight through line from the oil and gas industry to people like him who helped, lie and misinform people about the effects of the oil and gas industry on the climate, on the environment. And he's a proud mouthpiece for them. So this is obviously bogus. And I'm glad people here see through it, and I wish more people would.
Yeah.
So Dan Crenshaw, every other time I see him, he's pushing the Republican message, the old Republican message that world safety depends on American control of the oil markets. And that always goes back to what he's always talking to, because obviously, as you pointed out, he's getting, this donor money from oil companies, but also underneath that, it's about defending the petrodollar. One of the biggest reasons that the United States is in the Middle East all the time is defending that petrodollar. Anytime anybody wants to sell oil in anything other than American currency, boom, 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 we come and we bomb them up and we replace their government with somebody who will keep selling it in American dollars. So that's all this is really about, because the notion that making clean energy isn't the way to go doesn't make any logical sense. And this is the same thing we did with lead and everything that we do with gas and everything. We kept lead in products for decades because keep the money rolling.
Exactly. And my demand coming out of this is to the solar and wind industries. Can you please start buying off politicians like Dan Crenshaw? Because that seems like it's the only way that's going to move in the right direction.
That's a great idea, actually.
But anyway, he's spinning this fantasy of, if we only burn enough dead dinosaurs, then humanity will flourish and everything will be great. Well, things are already bad and they're getting worse. The number of people displaced by climate change related disasters since 2010 has already gone above 21.5 million. Each one of those a tragedy, and in some, terrible. By the way, by 2050, it could be somewhere between 216 and 1.2 billion people. But I'm sure Republicans are going to be very reasonable about the flood of tens of millions of people across the border because of the climate crisis that we're contributing to. Probably not. And it very much is here. Earlier this week, the latest report from the IPCC came out, and it made clear that without urgent action, humanity is going to fail to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And we know, as we've talked about hundreds and hundreds of times on this channel, that that's going to be devastating in a lot of different ways. One other fact, though, we've made allegations, baseless allegations, that he has been bought by these industries. Well, just to be clear, among the 6 executives who received a recent, you saw the video of the talk from Crenshaw, Chevron CEO Michael Wirth, ExxonMobil CEO Darren Woods. Chevron and ExxonMobil, by the way, are both among the top 10 contributors to Crenshaw, 29,000 and 23,000 respectively. Crenshaw's received a total of nearly $700,000 in campaign donations from the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas sector has given Johnson, who's that, Ron? Bill Johnson, 725,000. So by the way, in terms of what they've given him individually just this last year, the 29,000, Like, it is pathetic how cheaply they can be bought off. But in some, across their career, would you trust the opinion of a person on a topic from an industry where they'd gotten $700,000? Would a regular person ever trust someone who had done that? No, people understand the corrosive impact of money in politics, and no amount of faux illusions of human flourishing are gonna hide the fact that he has been bought. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, my final thought is just we always glaze over just the quantity of money that these people get from these companies over time. We're just so used to hearing the numbers that that you don't think anything of it. But these people are getting millions of dollars from these companies. Of course, they're going to do what they want.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think this also reflects his pivot from when he entered Congress, because he was kind of close with like the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Matt Gaetz crowd. And then he eventually just kind of broke very quietly, but he did break off from them and charted his new course. And here's the incentive. Hey, you drop all that lunatic stuff and look what you have waiting for you. We'll fund your campaigns. You do our bidding. There's going to be something waiting for you when you leave Congress. It shows kind of like a very evil but political evolution on Crenshaw's part. And he probably would have been an easier person to oust. Maybe not in Texas, but because of his early associations while he was in Congress.
That's true. Well, look, we got to take our second break. When we come back, though, some fascinating videos to play for you, including a judge noticing a particular approach of the FBI to what sort of houses get their doors kicked down and which don't. We have that for you after this. Hey everybody, welcome back to what remains of the first hour of the Young Turks with me, John Iadarola, host, if you don't know, of the Damage Report, which is up for a Webby, which you can vote for. Also, Rebel HQ contributor Jackson White, and the man who dives deep, Jordan Ewell. Thank you for being with us. We've got a couple more interesting stories to jump to. Let's get right into it. You can just jump into it.
Well, like virtually everyone in Washington, Nancy Pelosi has taken innumerable shots at the coronavax because she's a good person, unlike you. And yet, and this is kind of a bewildering fact for those of us who believe in science, Pelosi announced today that she's tested positive for Rona anyway. How does that work? In any case, in a statement, Pelosi's spokesman explained the vaccine is working very effectively. Quote, the speaker is fully vaccinated and boosted and is thankful for the robust protection the vaccine has provided, end quote, except for the fact she's now infected again. So, dude, great.
That's how humans laugh. Anyway, so Nancy Pelosi got sick, and Tucker Carlson, who went to elite colleges, doesn't understand how that's possible because, as you might recall, both in advance of the vaccines being rolled out, as well as the now more than a year that we've had with them, the claim that has always been made is, if you get vaccinated, you can't get COVID. Wait, that's not true. Nobody ever said that. He's just pretending that. He, a man who has been vaccinated, is just pretending that. And he also is pretending not to understand how they're saying that she's defended and yet she got it. Well, how is that a defense? That's like believing that the way that bulletproof vests protect you is by making all the bullets miss. That's not what protection means. You'll notice she's not in the hospital. You'll notice if you look into the numbers that those who are vaccinated have much lower rates of death, much lower rates of hospitalization, much less dangerous, much less debilitating cases of COVID. I understand that, you as a viewer understand that, Tucker Carlson definitely understands that, but for some reason that I'll never understand, in his best economic interests, to pretend that he doesn't understand that for the purposes of confusing his audience. And in this case, it's not just him. Brian Kilmeade made similar points about Jen Psaki.
And you tell us the vaccine works, but then you stop talking about it, and everybody that's testing positive for it, like Jen Psaki, 4 shots.
Yep.
So you wonder why people are having doubts about this whole 2-year torture, the condescending talk that we've been experiencing
Nancy Pelosi,
from that White House.
Nancy Pelosi, vaccinated and boosted. We do wish her well. We hope she's okay. I wonder if she's going to get the monoclonals.
I heard that she's asymptomatic. Most people are asymptomatic.
Well,
and they particularly don't have that strong symptoms, again, if they've been vaccinated, which every one of those 3 people, all of whom have been vaccinated, understand perfectly well. Now, none of this is new. Fox encouraging their fans to be suspicious of the medicine that the Fox hosts themselves are taking, but they are still sticking with it. It's been 2 years at this point, Jordan, and we know the toll. We may not be able to name names, but we know many members of their audience aren't here to watch anymore because they put their faith in those jokers.
Right, just look at the number of deaths in the United States compared with the rest of the world, country by country. We lead the world. This is horrific, and it's because of misinformation and outright lies by those hosts. There was a study done. I just did a Rebel HQ video on this because I thought it was really fascinating. Folks, researchers took a clip of Trump talking about the importance of getting the vaccine while he was on Fox in March of 2021, turned it into a PSA and ran it on YouTube before Fox videos and put that clip right at the beginning before you could skip it. And they identified 1,000 rural counties in the country that had low vaccination rates. And half of those counties got the ad and half they excluded from getting the ad. In counties that got the ad, over 100,000 people got the shot.
Wow.
And compared to the other counties. So if they're, the people that they look up to and trust and listen to, just tell them the truth, they'll do it. It's not really skepticism, it's that they're being willfully misled. It's really, really sad.
Yeah, well, I think one of the key points, the most important key points that you made, Jordan, in a couple segments ago, is that really the biggest strategy of the Republican Party, the Republican entity, is just humiliating the other side, point blank, period. Yeah. So much to the point, unless Donald Trump's in jail, here he comes in 2024, which let's not hold our breaths about that. Donald Trump's entire platform in 2024 is gonna be, I won in 2020. That's pretty much the only thing he's gonna be saying. The Republican Party, this is a party that doesn't believe in climate change, that since the education department was founded, they've been trying to get rid of it. They don't think we need the Environmental Protection Agency, even though they started it. I mean, they don't have anything to talk about. If they didn't do this, they would have to do the right thing. And Lord forbid that.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, in terms of the active being misinformed that you mentioned, Jordan, there was a great example in real time of it by Brian Kilmeade. Brian Kilmeade said, oh my God, Jen Psaki got COVID despite being vaccinated, which he knows is entirely possible, and that's not what protection means. And then says, no wonder people are suspicious. While he's doing his 500th segment intended to make them suspicious, he claims, no, it's just my willful misunderstanding of the situation that's making them be suspicious. It's not the fact that this is a targeted strategy by our network, which it clearly is, and it's a costly one. News just came out earlier today about life expectancy. One would think that in a functioning society, life expectancy should be trending up at all times. As we get better medicine, better understanding of food, all that, we're better protected from foreign invasion and everything. It should be going up, but it's not actually. They found that US life expectancy fell by just under a half a year in 2021, adding to a dramatic plummet that had happened in 2020. Many of the deaths occurred in people in the prime of their lives, is from COVID here, and drove the overall US life expectancy to fall to 26.6 years, the lowest in at least 25 years. Things are not just kind of getting worse, they're getting demonstrably worse in numeric terms and shaving years of your life off the end of it. And look, everybody understands that COVID is a part of this, but let's dive into COVID and Fox, the misinformation, the vaccine hesitancy, and all of that. So we're gonna break this down along racial lines. While the 2020 drop, so this is not the most recent number, but the one previous, the drop in life expectancy hit Black and Hispanic Americans hardest. One should not be surprised by that. Socioeconomically, we know there was basically nothing done to stop a completely unequal hit, both in terms of public health and economically during the first year of the pandemic. So this is hardly surprising, but that was not the case in the most recent year. Life expectancy among Hispanics didn't significantly change from 2020 to 2021. For Black Americans, it actually went up slightly by a little less than half a year. But in the most recent numbers, the life expectancy of white Americans fell by about a third of a year, mostly among white men who we know have the least chance of having gotten vaccinated because of people like Tucker Carlson and Brian Kilmeade. And so they are literally killing their fans, which is a hell of a strategy.
Well, it's working for them, so. I guess they'll keep it up. It's sad, and that's as sad and ridiculous as that is to say. It's literally working for them. It's looking like the Democrats are going to get swept in the midterm. So
it is looking like that. By the way, just a general question. Oh, sorry, Jordan, were you jumping in?
It's sadistic. They're rich, out of touch elites. And I think they just ultimately get a kick out of manipulating people, even to their own detriment, and sometimes to their death. They don't care. It's a game to them. When you get to that strata in our society, it's not just indifference to the poor and to the working class in this country. It is actual disdain and malice.
100%. By the way, my wife is watching a show right now. I think it's on Hulu, and I think it's called The Girl from Plainville. Are you familiar with this? It's about the girl who had been encouraging her boyfriend to kill himself. There's this big scandal. So what she did was encourage him to take his own life, and it's clearly illegal. But only when you do it with just one person specifically, not when you encourage many, many people to die. It's weird how the law works, isn't it? Anyway, unfortunately, I don't think, Ashwar, we don't have time, right? No, I don't think so. We're gonna save it. It can wait. It can wait. We'll get to it. It's an awesome story, but it'll wait. But anyway, I want to thank both of you for joining me. Jordan, as always, I want you to go prep yourself because I don't know how many people might have donated. You might have a chip in your near future, but thank you for being here, Jordan.
Thanks, John.
And Jackson White, as always, love having you here. Hope that everyone goes and watches your content on Rebel HQ.
Oh, absolutely. It's always good being on with you. It was a great show.
Good to have you, man. Okay, everybody, don't go anywhere. JR is gonna be taking over on the other side of this break. Don't forget to vote for TDR for the Webby. It would be great to win that, and I'd love to have 100% of the vote. I want it to be a highly suspicious vote, like some sort of election in North Korea. So go vote, make that happen, and we'll see you after this.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.